Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Morning Shot.
Welcome to Morning Shot. U.S. President Donald Trump moved swiftly in his first hours in office, kicking off his presidency by signing a slew of executive orders at the Capital One Arena in front of a roaring crowd and then in the Oval Office. Among the directives that has gained significant amount of attention so far, Trump repealed dozens of former President Joe Biden's actions, began his immigration crackdown, and withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accords. But what hurdles might he face before his plans become reality? For more insights on this, we're joined by Bruce Ackerman, Sterling Professor of Law and Professor of Political Science at Yale University. Professor, welcome to the Breakfast Show. Hope you're staying warm over there in your neck of the woods.
Well, it's actually not freezing anymore, so that's a positive sign.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Professor. Lots to cover today, as you know.
Pleasure.
So let's start with President Trump's declaration of a national emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border and the birthright executive order as well. So he announced plans to deploy troops to support immigration agents and restrict refugees and asylum. So given that birthright citizenship is protected under the 14th Amendment, how do you think his proposals to end birthright relationship and suspend the refugee admissions program, how could all of that unfold, do you think?
Well, his order to suspend the citizenship clause has been already declared unconstitutional by Judge Congenauer, a federal judge, and the judge is a rather respected person, and he has spent 40 years as a federal judge, and his opinion stated that in all his 40 years, he had never confronted something as outrageous and unconstitutional as President Trump's declaration. This case is going to go speedily on expedition to the Supreme Court of the United States. And this is one of the paradoxes here. One should not suppose that President Trump is a dictator yet, even though he's presenting himself as one. And this case, my best understanding, and I'm not talking about my preferences here, I'm talking, trying to give you an actual sense of likelihood. It could well be the case that the Supreme Court, with 3 of Trump's appointees, will unanimously declare that his claim is unconstitutional. So that, you see, paradoxically, because he's making all these right at the beginning, this is going to lead to a backlash effect here, where the Supreme Court is going to say no. So then the next step is, will he try to actually ignore the Supreme Court of the United States? Well, we'll find out, but I do not believe that this is the context in which that would be at all plausible.
Yeah.
So this paradox that in the first days asserting outrageous authoritarian claims will have paradoxical effects some of the time. It will be genuinely terrible. But this one will generate headline news around the world that Trump is not the authoritarian that he thinks he is.
So speaking of that, Professor, you talked about the backlash and how countries will react. What impact do you think President Trump's actions might have on foreign relations, particularly with Mexico and other Central American countries?
Well, here we have another paradox, you see. The fact that he will predictably impose a tariff on Mexican goods, because this is one of the things that, you see, there are a small number of things that Trump himself actually is committed to, and it is precisely tariffs is something that he really is committed to. And, well, this is going to have a very paradoxical effect with President Sheinbaum. President Sheinbaum has just come into power, And she is right now trying to assert her social democratic program. And what we can expect is that Trump's aggressive economic action will generate, once again, a big nationalist reaction in Mexico. And we should also consider, you see, the other great power in Latin America is Brazil. And Trump is also threatening Brazil with protective tariffs. If we add up the population of Mexico and Brazil, we get to 500 million. And we have to take, these are the superpowers of Latin America, and both of them, if confronting Trump's protective tariffs, will do something which they're already making motions toward, which is to reach out both to Asia and to Europe and generate more trade relations with them.
Okay.
So this is complicated, and we'll see, of course, I'm trying to give you a sense of the paradoxes of Trump's aggressive activity. We'll soon get to some tragedies.
Yeah, so let's turn to trade and tariffs now. It's not limited to Latin America, like you said. We are talking about how federal agencies are gearing up to investigate trade practices, including China's compliance with some trade agreements, like the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Do you expect President Trump to impose more aggressive trade tariffs? And what might this mean for American businesses?
Well, I think that he has already done so, and he can, under the law, engage in these protective tariffs. So I think that he will do this and generate this counter-reaction, which will lead to the development of more economic relations between Europe, Latin America, China, India, engaging with one another until American business is saying, what is going on here? Yeah. And impose a lot of pressure. But here, you see, it isn't clear how things will work out because we have Trump's commitments to these tariff increases, which will have a certain populist attraction to the workers in the relevant industries in the United States, while outside the United States, it will lead to very serious economic disadvantages to American industry.
Yeah, speaking of serious consequences, I want to touch on climate policy as well, Professor. That's another major focus here, with President Trump rolling back Biden-era policies, including withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, opening up federal lands for more oil drilling. So what's your take on this? What long-term effects do you foresee from such a significant shift in energy policy?
Well, this is a disaster. It just is a disaster. The world, that is, in a race against time. I have studied, this is one of the fields that I've actually studied a lot, environmental regulation and global warming over the decades. We are in a race against time. We have to have severe cutbacks. If the Biden administration was pushing for the actual enforcement of the Paris Agreement, you see, it's one thing to have an agreement, but it's another thing to actually implement it. And one of the things that if Biden had won was very seriously being considered was a large $1 trillion program with hundreds of billions a year to Africa, which is one of the great generators of global warming. And the world, China, Europe, the United States, the economic powers, India, have to, in one way or another, not only control themselves, but also focus on the 2 billion people out of 9 billion people who are on the planet Earth in 2060 who live in Africa. Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and opening up land for oil drilling, that's actually not as important as refusing to increase taxes so as to engage in leadership. Who else is going to lead? Who else is going to lead? Will China lead? Well, maybe they will try to be serious. She will try to be serious about constraining their own global discharges, and I think we're seeing this. Will India take the lead? Not at all. Will the Europeans take the lead? Well, you might have noticed is falling apart, and Trump's presidency will be a big force that will undermine it. So without American leadership here, we are in a very, very serious predicament. You have to look your children in the face and see that they may not actually live to the age of 60 or 70 on the planet Earth. And I am not exaggerating.
Wow. All right, Professor, I know that we covered a lot of heavy topics today. We have one more question before we let you go. So President Trump has been very vocal and outspoken about dismantling what he calls the deep state, right? So how significant are the executive orders that he signed in his first hours in office in reshaping federal bureaucracy and challenging long-established governance structures?
Yes, this is a very, very important issue. The focus on the office of the Inspector General. This is a crucial and, really tremendous rule of law advance over the last 40 years in the United States. Every department has an Inspector General and a very serious staff whose obligation it is. They're independent of the rest of the Secretary of State, the Department of State or whatever, Department of Defense. They're independent, and they have to examine independently whether the Department of State is complying with the laws of the United States and so forth. And when they find, and if they often do, that they are not complying, they issue a report, and there is, I don't want to go through a whole set of sanctions imposed upon high members of the executive branch, fines, et cetera, and so forth. So what Trump has done is unilaterally fired them and wants to replace them. Well, that's against the law. The law requires Trump to first of all, wait for 30 days. He has to give a reason, but not any reason. His staff has to give an explicit and elaborate account of why a particular Inspector General has failed to do his job. And that then goes to the courts. So Trump, once again, is going to engage in this action. All 15 of them, 15 of the fired people, quote unquote, will go to court. And once again, it will be up to the courts to decide this, and they will decide it in a very rapid fashion. But the other very problematic thing is he's going to appoint new inspector generals. Well, under the law, they're illegal. They don't get salaries. No one should obey them. This will be a crisis of legality, you see. In the case of the environment, this is a disaster. This will be a crisis which will demobilize the American government in very serious ways.
Absolutely. So from immigration and trade to climate and governance, thank you so much, Professor, for joining us today to share insights on these critical issues shaping the political landscape. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's a tragedy.
We've been speaking with Bruce Ackerman, Sterling Professor of Law and Professor of Political Science at Yale University. Stay ahead with Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.